many of the slaves imported to work. Africa as a continent has been subjected to a lot of cruelty in the past and modern times. The main point of every discussion relating to history has an account of slavery all around it, because even though the inhuman practice didn't happen on the continent alone, the drastic impact is felt most by Africans because majority of the slavery practice happened in Africa. Take time to ponder on what if Africans were to retaliate. Would the world be a better place? That could lead to a new set of war among continents, and the world at this stage doesn't need that kind of violence now. The world is at a stage where everyone must protect the next person because the problems keep increasing in height while the solutions are available in small quantities. Slavery didn't just happen on its own, even if the argument that it was might happen to open the eye of Africans to a new possibility that will make reality hit the continent so hard. The practice was simply inhuman and couldn't be encouraged again. Take a deep breath and bring this image of thousands of slaves being pushed through a small tunnel the size of a tiny window, after several days chained in an airless dungeon filled with just one or sometimes two windows. On a daily basis, these slaves mourn not because of the dead, but because they might not see the next days. In the same dungeon, their friends and relatives are dying in front of them. They struggle for food and water for days, and at the end of it all, they are shipped in chains to foreign lands to work on huge plantations for the slave master. We haven't mentioned the sex trade that went on during the slavery era. The beautiful ladies are sold to other slave masters to be used as sex workers in their homes. The slave masters sleep with these ladies at any time they want to. Human rights wasn't a thing in the mind of the African at that time. The main thing on their mind is how to survive to see the next day. They are not even promised the next day meal or water. Some of the ladies that refuse to sleep with these slave masters because they are either married or just don't want to are raped and forced into harsh labor for months as punishment. Some are chained in public and lashed till they run out of breath. The ones that sleep with the slave masters are made to either abort the babies when they get pregnant, or the babies were sold to other slave masters. What the entire slave masters wanted was to always pin Africans to the wall where they can never bounce back. The men are taken through different stages of cruelty. The stubborn ones are either killed or exported to farms. Most of these strong men are killed during transport through the sea to other places. The ones that fall sick are thrown into the sea, whether dead or alive. The slave master did all this so the sick slaves won't carry diseases to the plantation they are supposed to work on. On different accounts narrated and documented by historians, most of the slaves wanted to just die. In some instances, the less brave ones killed themselves. Meanwhile, in the dungeons, they use their finger to make different writings on the wall whilst crying and waiting for their fate, which is solely in the hands of the masters. Their fingernails get chopped after long hours of writing with them on the walls of the dungeon. One can just imagine the pain they might have felt in the process. Using your fingers to write on a heavy concrete dungeon till they get tired and continue again when they regain some amount of energy. It can be frustrating using pen to write for a long period of time, but these slaves had no choice. They wanted to leave words behind for generations not born yet. The real question is, has this generation learned anything from the sufferings that their forefathers went through for them? Every single African must ask this question and let it be part of their daily thoughts. That's the only way to find a solution. No need to retaliate against the foreigner, just collective effort to build Africa from where it is now using past history. Till date, the marking left by these slaves during the time in the dungeons in some of the castles are still there and have formed part of the history of Africans and Africans abroad who normally visit these castles to hear the stories for them. These are not just stories, they are true life events that when you think about will make sense even from the surface. That's what happened in Africa, where the slave trade was a lucrative business for the slave master. The slaves that are shipped to different plantations in the world to serve their new masters are also subjected to a new form of cruelty. The slave masters often accuse these slaves of carrying malaria from the continent to their plantation, but not the mosquito that caused the disease. Because of the conditions of life for these slaves back home, mosquitoes easily find comfort via stagnant water, and that could happen anywhere else in the world. On the other hand, the slave master blamed of introducing yellow fever, more deadly disease from the bites of different species of mosquito that later dominated in South America and malaria in Africa. It was a blame game of exchange of diseases across the board, but Africans were always on the receiving end of things, especially anything evil. It was enough to slave Africans. The slave master wanted the total control of the continent and to determine what goes in and out of Africa. Even in modern day, lots of diseases are hanged on the neck of Africans, and the ones that are from foreign land are covered and made to look less impactful. The argument now is, will all these have happened if Africans stood their grounds against the slave masters? Most of the forefathers who were slaves did so. They stood to fight against the slave masters. They couldn't get anywhere because they were betrayed from within. The rest were captured and taken through a tougher hardship and different punishment that would deter others from even trying again to rise against the slave masters. The more the African tries to fight the oppressor, the weaker they become during the slavery era. Africans have contributed immensely to the building of strong foundation in the slave masters' country. They worked on plantations for them to help boost their agricultural economies, and Africans did most the hard labor job that made their countries a place to visit. All these happened in the past when our forefathers had less education. If they have been able to build other countries, this generation can lay the foundation for Africans to build their continent. But the least said, the better. The new generation who has been well educated by the foreigner are rather running away to the other places of the world and sometimes refusing to stay on the continent to help with the rebuilding process. All this can be attributed to bad leadership and decision making by African leaders for Africans. Why do graduates have to suffer years to make ends meet on the continent? A lot of the graduates are thought to seek for jobs, and right from the university, the cycle continues. When all the accounts provided on Africa shows clearly how this continent can be the shining star. Funny enough, the bad leadership doesn't look like ending soon because the youth that are suffering now will also harbor the idea of being corrupt to be rich when they get the opportunity to occupy higher office. It's a long chain of problems that started from slave trade, where the African was someone who was brainwashed through cruel treatment into believing that there will forever be nothing good that will come from the African. Bad leadership has made Africans vulnerable in their own continent and must sadly revert back to the slave master for help. How can you be free when your slave master continues to feed you? The visionary leaders wanted to end that, but unfortunately, they didn't live longer to accomplish the task ahead. Stacy Amewoyi developed a knack for writing and sharing real-life stories with the world through her first set of bestsellers, which include The Price of Love, The Language and Keys of Love, The Science of Love, The King's Choice, My True Life Story, You Only See My Beauty, You Don't Know My Story, as well as a critically acclaimed 3-part novel titled The Missing Fathers Volume 1, When All Hopes Fade Away, The Missing Fathers Volume 2, Dear Father, Read This and Come Back, The Missing Fathers Volume 3, A Time Capsule of the Globe. Watch out for her next set of books titled Africa and the African, The Rising Stars, Africa and the African, A Giant in Slumber, Africa and the African, The Fallen Powers, and existing simultaneously as allies. You can grab copies of Stacy Amewoyi's books available in hard and soft copies, as well as audiobooks on various digital platforms and ebook stores including Amazon, Walmart, Nook, Google Books, Barnes & Noble, Apple Books, Audible, Goodreads, Ingram Spark, and www.stacymfoundation.org. Proudly sponsored by The King's Choice Publishing House, Mawina Multimedia, The 360 Show with Stacy, New York Fashion Boutique, New York Beauty Supply, Stacy M Foundation, and SMA Ultimate Services.